I'm Shahar Azani, and in the news, Israel at war. As Israel continues its attack on the savages of Nazi Hamas in Gaza, the attacks against Israel intensify in the media and also against Jews and Jewish communities worldwide. How is this war affecting the regional geopolitics and our everyday lives? Is it still relevant even to speak of a possible peace with Saudi Arabia? And what will the day after look like? We, of course, can't forget what's happening on college campuses and some of our streets to counter the hate. To answer all of these questions and so much more, joining us now is Dr. Eric Mandel. Dr. Mandel is the founder and director of MEPIN, Middle East Political and Information Network. He's a senior security editor at the Jerusalem Report and a prolific writer and speaker, and it's always a pleasure to have him on JBS. Dr. Mandel, how are you?
I am working hard because what is going on is unprecedented. It's traumatized me, the American Jewish community, and of course, our brothers and sisters in Israel. So I don't think anybody can say that they're well, but I think we need to stay strong and keep working, and that's what I'm doing.
You know, it's every time I ask these questions, how are you? It's like this mundane question we ask each other, and for some reason, or not for some reason, as of October 7th, it always makes you, how are you? How are we? I want to start straight with, I know that you've actually been in Israel during that week of the attack. Tell us a little bit about that. What were you doing in Israel and what happened? How did it feel during those harrowing days?
So I happen to have just coincidentally been in Israel doing my usual work in the Middle East. I was with a research center that I work with called ALMA, and I was spending 3 days up on the northern border, which is where Israel was focused. And it's an amazing think tank. And so I was in places like Har Dov, which is called Sheba Farms, and in border areas, and just assessing the intelligence with the research people. And that weekend, I went down to visit friends in a place called Yerucham, a beautiful, sleepy place in the Negev. And the sirens went off at 6:30 in the morning, and we really didn't know what was happening. And I called my friend and colleague in the Jerusalem Post, Seth Franzman, and I said, Seth, something's happening there. You want to take a drive to Sderot? And because we have been in the field, we've been in Iraq together in the West Bank.
But wait, you were in Yerucham in the south of Israel on that Saturday morning.
Just coincidentally, and it had echoes of 1973 in the Yom Kippur War. You saw people, we didn't know what kind of was going on, but we saw people with the talesim running out of synagogues, religious people getting into cars, going to the security units, to the IDF. But we didn't have the information. Wasn't really out there. We had some idea something bad was going on. So I headed from the south up to Sderot, and Seth headed down from the north from Jerusalem. And there was I didn't see really any Israeli IDF Sahal soldiers, a couple of police guards, and I drove right into Sderot, and I came upon a massacre that was going on in real time. You saw people lying, a person on a motorcycle lying on the ground who was just killed just for being alive, being Jewish. And then more and more that I saw. And it took another hour before I knew kind of what was going on. And also till I actually saw the first IDF vehicles.
Eric, you were in Sderot. What time into the morning on that Saturday?
That was 3:00 in the afternoon. I was there.
Wow.
So it started, if you will, 7:00 in the morning. And we heard in the distance some booms. We didn't know whose they were. And again, there was no information. And I was sitting there and I said, I just can't sit here anymore. And I need to get some firsthand information of what's going on for when I go back to Congress, for when, I had no idea really what was going on there. So I literally went there and, I witnessed it in real time. And then the days after, I was in Ashkelon. I saw the civilian devastation that was going on, the war crimes committed by Hamas, sending missiles into Israeli civilian areas. I saw the emptiness of the streets of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And I had meetings because I was there. Everything was planned beforehand with Israel government people and think tanks and whatever. So we quickly changed gears. My most important meeting that did not take two of them that they did not cancel on me because of the situation was with former Defense Minister Boogie Yailon and head of the JISS Ephraim Imbar, but Dan Diker, the JCPOA, and many others to try to get what was going on. But everybody was a panic of what was going on and getting the information. And that was just something so difficult to digest, but I have to, put on a different hat and report what I see, analyze it, and see how for America, and I talk about American national security interests to the American Congress, which I believe are coincident with Israel's 98% of the time. How do we put this all together and not just look at emotional scenes? And where does this take us next?
Eric, you were in Sderot on Saturday, Simchat Torah, October 7th at 3 p.m.
Correct.
Describe what you saw upon coming to the site of the massacre. This is firsthand testimony. What were your feelings? I mean, those savages were still roaming about.
It was, again, you had no idea. And driving on the road, up the Gaza envelope, past the kibbutzim, that line there, you hardly saw anyone. It was empty. You didn't see Israel Defense Forces. You really didn't see civilians. It was kind of crazy. And when you drove into this scene, it was surreal. Because how do you process it? Now, Shahar, that what I've done in the past, I'm also a surgeon. And what I do is I'm able to compartmentalize on a personal level between the gruesomeness, if you will, and being analytical, and some of the skills I had from being a surgeon. I think I was able to take into those places and process it without let the emotions take over, understanding what I was seeing. But when you see it raw, when you see people in vans lying dead next to there who were just shot for just being Jewish, it was crazy. One of the most eerie scenes in Sderot was a supermarket that was bullet-ridden. And even though in Sderot, they don't speak very much English there, the alarm sound, the warning was in English coming out of this supermarket that kept repeating itself. And this is where I was staying until after I had witnessed the scene. And it kept saying in English, "The supermarket is on fire, please leave." Again and again. The whole thing was surreal. And again, I didn't know at that point where I was, I didn't know about the Nova concert, which was elsewhere. I didn't know 28 different places were attacked simultaneously. I didn't know IDF bases were taken over. There will be a time in the future when there will be analysis of what happened here, and there will be leaders who don't exist anymore because they took their eyes off of this situation. That's not the time for this. But the only thing I will say here, besides the intelligence and operational failure, which is of great magnitude, was underestimating your enemy. And that's what Israel did here. It didn't underestimate Hezbollah, but it underestimated what Hamas was capable of. And the ideology, the hatred, the visceral hatred. I think, when you're saying underestimation, I think on the military side is one thing, but I think there was an underestimation of their ideology and their willingness to perpetrate the level of evil that they have. Some sort of a thought that they're kind of like, if only we allow them to sustain their governance over Gaza, if only we give them some, just like Bennett Lapid government allowed tens of thousands of Gazans to come into Israel, just like the Netanyahu government allowed money to come in from Qatar. If we only let them manage themselves, they can be contained, right? Right. Listen, it was the easier choice than dealing with what the reality was. Just as an aside, I was in Qatar in May with the Qatari ambassador to Gaza, who brings the suitcases of money. I was invited to go into Gaza this fall. I accepted, and they told me they can ensure my safety. So I'm obviously incredibly glad that I did not accept that invitation of what goes on. We're going to also have to deal with Qatar in the future. There's going to be a lot of things. Right now, they're saying, oh, look, they're a conduit, to talk and to get the hostages out.
Oh, but wait, I want to get to that in an orderly fashion, because you are, Eric, you're a fountain of knowledge, and I can't tell you how thankful I am, both personally and for all of our viewers, to have your wisdom. But I had no idea that you were there on the day of in Sderot at 3 p.m. It kind of takes me back to thinking about where were you on 9/11. It's like, it's that kind of moment. So
I was in New York and I saw the towers burning.
Yeah. This is worse
in comparison. This is much worse than what happened during 9/11.
Yeah.
And I don't minimize 9/11 at all.
No, but the torture, the torment, the mutilation, the rapes, some of these things, but let's, I want your perspective, first of all, since you were there that week. Give us your outlook on Israeli society. How did Israeli society, on those moments, how did they receive it? And what's your sense of where Israelis stand?
Okay, so just a little more than a month ago, I was by the Federation and other JCRC asked me to talk about judicial reform and the disunity.
The good old days.
The good old days, right? And now the silver lining, units are 150% oversubscribed. There is no us and them anymore. Israelis came back, as they always do. The unity and cohesion is back. That was what it was. Sometimes I would always say, and not just me, that Israel's external enemies we could deal with, but it's Israel's disunity we can't. Now we've learned this is not. I guess what the take-home lesson that I look at from this was a month ago, the only existential threat the Israelis thought, the Americans thought, was the nuclear program, maybe. Now, this is not 1973, what happened here. This is 1948. This is more dangerous than 1948 because of the weapons, the proxies that we Americans have allowed to grow. We have not sustained sanctions on Iran. They've been doing this. And so what we have sowed, we have reaped. And we are dealing with a horrific situation. So on a personal level, nobody in Israel is not touched by this. While I was there, I was in the house in Yerucham. The young woman who was there, her best friend's husband was already killed that first day. My dear friend Yitzhak Sokolov, who runs my Israel seminars, their son's best friend was in a tank up north doing training. Got severely injured, and he was in the ICU in Western Galilee Hospital. There were things you don't even hear about that go on, but Israeli society comes together, and that's important. And it's got to be like when I remember being there during the Second Intifada. The economy is going to be devastated. The people are going to be traumatized. And it's up to American Jews and American pro-Israel. Thank God so many Gentiles in this country care so much about Israel and realize that Israel is an American asset we can't give up, that we're going to have to come together, not only process this, but learn how to support it and not sweep away the uncomfortableness of dealing with terror groups that surround Israel and the head of the octopus being Iran. And
it's if we've learned, if there is one lesson, then there are many, but if there is one lesson to take from everything that's taking place, is exactly that, right? Believe them when they tell you who they are and what they want to do. Never underestimate their willingness to execute their murderous ideology. So I want to ask you, from that perspective, as a geopolitical analyst and an experienced observer, how do you see the war that Israel is conducting against the savages of Hamas, the Nazi Hamas organization in Gaza? What do you see? How is it progressing? And what do you think about the goals of the war as they have been defined by the Israeli government?
Okay, so first of all, the best analogy here is what America did to ISIS in Mosul. 1 million civilians embedded or human shields, and the Iraqi security forces did not follow international law like Americans or Israeli soldiers do, and 11,000 civilians were killed. But this is what I teach at colleges or to organizations or to Congress. because the images you see on media look like Israel is just having vengeance, anger, just blowing up civilian buildings. So when you see an image of a civilian building blown up, that is a fact. It is not a fact in context. And one of the things I teach is proportionality in war. What does that mean? So if we get manipulated by the numbers. More Palestinians are killed than Israelis. By the way, we don't know the difference between terrorists and civilians.
And also counting, the numbers coming out are from the Ministry of Health in Gaza, which we know is Hamas. But let's assume go with that. Yeah, let's assume.
Right. So, first of all, this is not just Hamas bad, Palestinian civilians, they're good. When you look at the statistics, Palestinian polls of Palestinians, there is a majority that want Hamas to be in power before this war going on. And when you cannot differentiate civilian and terrorists because they don't have different clothing on, and the civilians, a lot are for Hamas. It is much more gray. This is not just innocent civilians. But what is
much more gray? It's much more gray also for the reason that we've seen images from the massacre of October 7th when we saw ordinary Gazans who come out to rape, to loot, to kill, to murder, not just Hamas savages.
Right, exactly. So what I teach about proportionality in war. So should Israel, if 1,700 Israelis were murdered, innocent people, should we just go and kill 1,700 people? Of course not. That's not proportionality. And that's not what's explained by mainstream media. And it's horrific. Proportionality is related to the military goal you're trying to achieve. Israel's military goal is now existential, which means it must destroy Hamas. You're not going to destroy the ideology, Shahar. It's still there with ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And by the way, all of this on the Sunni side comes from the Muslim Brotherhood, which is all about jihad and killing Jews. The Shiite version is from Iran. But proportionality in war, if Israel could not hit a so-called civilian target, it would not be able to fire a bullet. The total infrastructure of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad is within and under civilian buildings. And by international law, not a politicized version of international law, by international law, if the military gain is sufficient to the goal, you can hit civilian areas where there are tunnel networks and command centers and munitions. You can do that legally. They are not immune anymore. And that is what is not told. My heart breaks for innocent civilians that are used as human shields, but America would have never won World War II. There were way more German civilians killed than Brits or American civilians, of course. And so there is
that evil. There was an urgent need to get rid of that evil from the world, just like there is an urgent need to get rid of the Nazi Hamas evil, as we've seen on October 7th. No viable country can allow such an entity to fester on its border.
Yeah, if you look at this, think of us as Americans that in an approximation, the attack, imagine drug cartels out of Mexico. The equivalent numbers in America would have been over 75,000 Americans killed and over 10,000 hostages taken. How would we Americans, right to left, respond to that? We'd carpet bomb Mexico City if they didn't acquiesce. There's obviously a difference between a superpower and a regional power, and there's certainly anti-Semitism that's limiting, a fair response and telling Israel what it can do. But the implication when you hear, and it bothers me terribly, even Secretary of State Blinken and President Biden, who I think have been basically very good about this, where they say Israel has to follow international law. Israel follows international law. So how do I know this? This is my fifth Gazan war I've covered. I've been there in live fire from Hamas. I've been in 2012, for example, I was with Radar Raz, watching in real time on the Gaza border, Hamas shooting into Sderot at civilians. And I watched Israelis desperately trying not to hit Palestinian civilians. And I remember coming out, and it's never left me. This is, we're only talking 11 years ago for that one. I've been in other ones. And I want to tell you one other story. I hope my army, the American army, is as ethical. The other story, I'll tell you, 2014 war, I was there. I had spent time afterwards with the Mandel unit. The Maglen unit was being fired from by a hospital. It had a big H on the top on the map. So they knew if they fired, it would be a war crime. They got a military lawyer, ethics lawyer on the phone who told them they had to risk soldiers to get an audio feed in, get a drone to videotape it from on top. Got my friend Boogie Ayalon on the phone, who was defense minister. They went in, they found tunnels, they found terrorists, and they lost 3 soldiers because they followed international law. You don't hear those stories of what's there. And that's why I go, you asked me why I went to Stay Road on day one, because people are already saying it didn't happen. They're saying that artificial intelligence created it. And by the way, there's a real-time Holocaust denial going on. Hamas and its sympathizers are scrubbing social media of those images now. And by the way, when you put in, if you go on social media or TikTok or Instagram, which is where the young generation gets the information I speak to in universities, when they get it, you put in the massacre in the Nova Festival and things like that, all you get are images of Palestinian civilians in Gaza. You could almost 1 out of every 20 is of actually what you were looking for. And so the narrative is changing. The pendulum is swinging. The questions I get are about isn't this, you're doing collective punishment, and they don't know about proportionality and distinction of war. Israel fights a war that it's supposed to, but it's not about numbers. And unfortunately, innocents die in war.
Eric, do you think the goal set forth by the Israeli government is achievable? In your perception, looking at the strategic goals of the war?
So their goal is to dismantle and destroy Hamas, either kill every Hamas person or have them shipped out someplace else, which doesn't thrill me. I remember after Beirut being the PLO being sent to Tunisia and all of that.
And that worked well for Tunisia, just like it worked before for Beirut, just like it worked before for Jordan.
Yeah, I meet with Fatah and PLO and Palestinian Authority, and that's a whole other issue. But it's their goal. That goal has to be. They cannot live with that presence that's there.
Correct.
Will the international community give them the time to do it? No. There already calls, you see, in Congress where I work, there are many calling for a ceasefire, which is a victory for Hamas. No other country would be asked to do that. So they're not, and by the way, when you're dealing with a labyrinth of tunnels, multi-story, built to entice and capture Israeli IDF soldier hostages, and it is incredibly difficult. With the metro,
so much money, Eric, has been invested. I mean, people who complain about the plight of ordinary Gazans should see how many billions of dollars have been invested in an infrastructure that's going to be destroyed. And like you say, Israel has no other choice. But I just want to focus. So you're saying the goals are achievable simply because there is no other choice. And I couldn't agree more. I want to ask you, what are Israel's options after? Let's say Hamas is viably eradicated as a military force, as a political entity in the Gaza Strip. What then for Israel? How do you see the next steps?
So it's not going to be the segue maybe you expect. The next question is, can you live with Hezbollah in the north? Because you have 65, 70,000 people displaced up there. Can they go back to their homes there, or their places a Jew can't live, an Israeli Jew or an Israeli Arab or an Israeli Druze can live in safety in the north with a much, much more fierce enemy, much more organized, much more trained, much more lethal? Can you go back to that reality? That's going to be the next question for Israel of what's there. The question maybe you were alluding to, it was regarding who takes over if Israel is there. Does Israel want to occupy 2 million people that basically have a visceral hatred? There will be a counterinsurgency that will be there. It's not going to be pretty. Does the Egyptians want to help? Absolutely not. Hamas is Muslim Brotherhood, arch enemy of Sisi and the Egyptians. Do the Arab moderate states want to be involved? Beforehand, when I would go there unofficially, they really did not care very much of the Palestinians, who they thought were their own worst enemy. Will America be involved? Will Europeans be involved? Do we trust the UN? The UN in the north has stopped 0 of the 150,000 missiles to Hezbollah. So I work with somebody in the Senate who is involved in the Kosovo reconstruction. And he said what really needs to go on is basically an international force in cooperation with Arab forces and maybe a veneer of the Palestinian corrupt authority to go in and take this over. What really needs to happen, again, the answers are not hard, but politically they're hard. What Egypt needs to create a massive tent city for the Gazans to be displaced to, while the rest of Gaza is rebuilt and Israel can create security barriers there. The Egyptians want no part of it because they know that already the Sinai is filled with ISIS and Hamas. By the way, ISIS and Hamas are basically the same ideology.
Right.
And basically they've taken lots of European Nazi anti-Semitism into their charters and things like that. So let be no mistake.
And we've seen ISIS flags in European cities being, in support of Hamas.
Right, in support of Palestinians. By the way, if you are pro-Palestinian, you should be anti-Hamas. Right. The idea that these people are saying from the river to the sea, that means destroying Israel, killing every Jew. This is not about 2 states or 2 peoples.
So in your opinion and experience, do you think talks are taking place as we speak about the future of Gaza post-Nazi Hamas?
Yes. So first of all, nobody wants to, but if nothing else, the Americans are pushing that. Blinken is going around having these discussions of what could be there. I think he's getting tremendous resistance, kind of saying, "Hey, the Israelis, you broke it, you take it over." And Israel will, for a certain period of time, have to reoccupy it because they're not going to get every tunnel. It is impossible. There will be, and again, there's a tremendous amount of civilians, quote civilians, that are really Hamas or sympathetic for Hamas.
Yeah, it's like, how are you even differentiating when you're describing a situation, Eric, where the savages of Hamas are wearing plain clothes? So they fire an RPG, and if they're dead, they're civilian dead. So it's like you never kill a Hamas terrorist ever, like according to their registries and in the years past. Never ever has a Hamas terrorist been killed. They're all civilians, and by the way, children.
Right. By the way, so we have 3 war crimes that they commit. 1, they shoot at Israeli civilians. 2, they use their own people as civilians as human shields, and they use child soldiers. And that's actually part of my talks.
That's a very important point that you're making. I want to just because I know time, I want to ask you, you mentioned up north in Hezbollah. In your opinion, should Israel open a new front? Should Israel finish with the savages of Hamas and then move to Hezbollah? Should it be handled diplomatically, politically? How do you see the situation up north?
Well, the question first would be, remember, Hezbollah, unlike Hamas, Hezbollah follows the exact instructions of Iran because of guardianship of the jurist Waleed al-Faqih. So will Iran ignite a full-scale war up north? We'll start with that. Because right now it's a terrible term, tit for tat, when Israelis are dying from anti-tank missiles from Hezbollah.
And just the other day, an Israeli civilian was killed as a result of one of those missiles. Yep.
Right. So why would Iran not want to ignite Hezbollah here? Because what did they build this proxy network, the flagship being Hezbollah, to be a shield against their nuclear program? We will send these 150,000 missiles and rain terror upon you if you preemptively attack our nuclear. By the way, everybody's eyes are off of nuclear. Who knows what they've been doing in the last month, Iran?
Right.
So what should Israel do on a real basis, being analytical here? Israel should have preemptively struck the North. That would have made tremendous sense. The Americans, my country, said absolutely, positively don't do that. Just like Henry Kissinger and Nixon told Golda Meir when they knew they could have preemptively shrunk, they told them to get a bloody nose. And you saw the devastation of the Yom Kippur War. Obviously, this is magnitudes worse than that. America's saying don't do that, which gets to the next question. First of all, if you don't make the first move here, Israel, they're going to be devastated, at least initially, if Hezbollah is ignited by Iran. But we have 2 carrier groups there, which I think was a surprise to Iran. And the question is, does Joe Biden, if Israel is overwhelmed, and I've spoken to many think tanks that saying that I know for sure that Israel's multi-layered anti-missile system cannot stop anywhere near enough of the missiles, precision-guided missiles coming from the north. Will America activate its carrier groups with cruise missiles, drones, F-16s to devastate Hezbollah in cooperation with Israel? Or will it be a paper tiger? And then that message will go around the world. You can kiss goodbye Israeli-Saudi normalization. You can say the Saudis will have to get into bed with the Iranians if America does not act. As it is America, we're doing, and I actually had a argument with the American ambassador to Qatar saying we are not protecting our soldiers. And this is even before this war, American soldiers being killed by Iranian militias, and we are not responding in that part of the world. That shows weakness, lack of resolve. So the question is, if the North ignites, will America help? And I'm pretty confident Blinken has made the message, President has made the message to Israelis that if you start this war, even if it's for your advantage, we're not going to be there for you, which puts Israel in a terrible...
But is there any scenario, in your opinion, Eric, that the U.S. might intervene militarily?
Yes, because I think if they see Israel, if they see precision-guided missiles headed to Azareli Towers, to the Knesset, aimed at Dimona, the alleged nuclear plant in Israel, if those things happen, the Haifa oil facilities and chemical facilities, and those get blown up, and thousands of Israelis, and there's no safe place in Israel, America should, for American national security interest, help defend Israel, even though we're a war-weary country. And I'm going to tell you, by the way, I'm a big believer in the law of unintended consequences. But if you ask me what would happen if America, with Israel, with American help, was able to devastate Hezbollah, the Iranian people would be inspired by it. There could be what we should be calling for, regime change there. The Saudis will see that the Israelis and the Americans are not paper tigers. They would distance themselves from Iran and maybe China and maybe Russia, and the Israeli-Saudi normalization would go on. The Middle East afterwards, if America devastated with Israel Hezbollah in the north and Israel alone devastated Hamas in the south, it's going to be bloody and messy and lots of unintended consequences, but the Middle East would be realigned. And if the goal here, and this is what I've been talking to Congress about, and half hear me and half don't, America, we should not be afraid to say, we are in favor of Iranian regime change. Being pro-Iranian means being with the Iranian people. We've abandoned them. It is a disgrace on America. We should be there for them. And if they were able to take over, the Middle East would be a better place.
You know, in many cases, for instance, that of Iran, the lessons learned from the savage attack against Israel on October 7th is you can't just negotiate with the Iranian on this and look away from everything else that they've been doing that truly undermines the national and global security, both of moderate regimes in the Middle East and even of the United States of America in the Middle East and through the South American network. You can't ignore what they're up to and the risk that it poses to you. And from what I understand from you, the more projection of power we'll see, the more stability and peace we might be able to ensure. It's kind of like an upside down logic from some of the perceptions.
Listen, it's all around the world. If people believe that you are military credible, they will be less likely to act. This message echoes all the way to Taipei in Taiwan and to Beijing. Is America a paper tiger or not? This message echoes to Ukraine. This message echoes all around the world. Where is America headed? Are we a declining power? Or are we still the great moral force for the world?
Eric, you're not just a strategic analyst who's on the ground in Israel and throughout the Middle East, who works in Washington, who tries to really enlighten the field of public opinion with information and education. You're also very much present on one more important battleground today, which is U.S. college campuses. You visited over 10 in the past month, spoken to students. Share with us a little bit of your perspective about what's wrong, what's happening now on college campuses, what are you hearing on the ground? Because there is a lot of concern about anti-Semitism and, quite frankly, anti-Americanism.
Well, first of all, the Jewish kids on college campuses are petrified. They have never seen really face-to-face anti-Semitism. By the way, anti-Semitism is not new on college campuses. There's many studies that have shown that 50% of college Jewish kids have seen or know anti-Semitic incidents, but it has gone to a much higher level and they're scared. And cowardly administrations and faculty are not protecting them. And they are, and it is incredible double standard, with these university administrators that if you said the wrong pronoun, you end up suspended. Now you have microaggressions. You have macroaggressions of anti-Semitism, intolerance, abuse, intimidation, and physical assaults going on college campuses. And the administrators all of a sudden are saying, oh, this is free speech. Hate speech is not free speech. Where are the safe spaces for the Jewish kids? It's only for other minority kids. The administrations of universities, not only the statements have not been good, the few that have been good that have come out, there are no significant consequences. I remember you have Students for Justice in Palestine that's been on campuses for years, inflaming anti-Semitism and hate. The only university that I know of that kicked them off campus was Fordham. They hate just because you say I'm a pro-Palestinian organization that you get some immunity. No, if you incite hate, you challenge the Title VI protections of all students, but now Jewish students. And when you get to this moral equivalency where you hear, and this was very discouraging, where you heard the administration when they asked questions about anti-Semitism, they immediately went to Islamophobia. And there is some of that going on. And that's true. There was an incident in Stanford yesterday. But when FBI statistics, year in and year out, that the majority of religious hate crimes are against Jews. If you
60%, yep.
Yeah, if you added up all the other ones, and I'm criticizing against Asians, against Muslims, against Sikhs, they don't all add up close to the hatred against Jews. And so we have not been protected, Jewish people and kids on campus. So you need consequences. First, they got to throw off the outside agitators. They're not doing that. And I can tell you stories about that when I've spoken in Cornell in years past of outside agitators at Vassar in different universities. And second, they have to enforce Title VI. I think universities should be sued, and there are people looking at this because they are not doing it. And then the administration...
Remind to our viewers Title VI. You're mentioning Title VI. What is Title VI?
It's based upon the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And basically, it encompasses, protections not only for your race, but it's also now has incorporated anti-Semitism. It actually started under the Trump administration. I think it was Kenneth Marcus got it there, and the Biden administration has basically continued it. But you not just have to continue it, you have to enforce the protection. The Biden administration should be activating the Justice Department, not with words, but to go and prosecute people. And the other thing is what the administration should do is any campus, and every campus, even private, gets federal funding. If they can't protect their Jewish kids, cut the federal funding. And alumni, billionaires, and you've seen, I think it was Bill Ackman at Harvard and others have spoken up and saying, I'm not going to give my money or threaten not to give my money. Don't just threaten, stop the money. And I can tell you unofficially that I know that the universities are scared of this. They are hiring lawyers to sue donors who will take away funds that they've pledged. So they're going to go after the pro-Israel donors if they don't fulfill it. Let them, they should be willing to have that fight. Stop it,
Instead of doing what they need to do to take lawyers to defend their Jewish students and stand up to the haters, they're going to retain lawyers to go after donors to force them to donate, which is a contradiction in terms.
In Colombia, what they're doing is that they're saying that the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas students are being doxxed and things like that, exposed. And so they're getting lawyers and protecting them, not the pro-Israel students. It is Orwellian of what's going on. No consequences, this will not end. This has to be strong consequences. And free speech, I'm a big free speech advocate. This is not free speech when you call for violence and intimidate.
Or harass students. We've seen videos from Harvard, of the Jewish student being harassed and encircled by, I think, the editor of the Harvard Law Review.
The editor of the Harvard. Now, can you imagine, just this is the litmus test. Imagine that was any other group, that was being harassed like that, an African-American, an Asian, a Sikh, whatever we're talking about, that those group of students would not only have been suspended, they would be expelled.
Right.
But do that to that Jewish student, including somebody at the level of the Harvard Law Review editor, and nothing has happened to them, speaks volumes, because that is anti-Semitism. Let's remind our viewers, if you have a double standard against Jews or the Israeli nation, Jewish nation, you are an anti-Semite. If you demonize Jews or the state of Israel, by calling them Nazis, you're an anti-Semite. And if you say Israel doesn't have a right to exist from the river to the sea, you are an anti-Semite. So Congresswoman Tlaib is an anti-Semite.
Right. And I think consequences is really what's being called for. When you talk about these double standards, I have to tap into, the emotional, the personal, and ask you, how do you explain the fact that the word humanitarian only seems to be relevant for Gazans, and nobody's thinking about Kfir, who is 10-month-old, 1 month in captivity in Hamas's hands, a baby, an Israeli baby snatched from his home into the darkness of that horrid city. And nobody squeaks, nobody says a word, none of the progressive, none of the liberal, none of the human rights organization, nobody speaks on their behalf. Why? How do you explain this?
Over the last 20, 25 years, quote unquote, human rights organizations, from Human Rights Watch to Amnesty International, the United Nations, have been captured by anti-Zionists. It was politically correct saying I couldn't hate an individual Jew, but I can express my anti-Semitism openly by hating the Jewish nation. And they are the prejudice of those organizations and they justify it. This goes on college campuses, goes on in these organizations, where anybody who doesn't think like you is beyond the pale, immoral. I don't have to even listen to what they say. They're bad, evil people. And so anybody...
Eric, he's a baby.
Yeah, but he's a future IDF soldier. So he's a legitimate target. I've heard that craziness, that there are no innocent Israelis because they all go into the army. So they're all potentially war criminals. So we're just preemptively attacking those. There is rationalizations, craziness. But yes, there were one of the things I have a picture, a slideshow of just the 30 plus children, babies, and we have no sign of life. By the way, I can tell you, unlike the administration here, because Hamas is not our existential threat, but it is for Israelis. Israelis do not want humanitarian aid till they know there's signs of life of the hostages.
Right.
And by the way, by international law, I told you I teach about this. Water and food do need to go in. Fuel, no. Fuel is not, according to our Department of Defense Manual of War. So when the demand to go in fuel to put in to run hospitals, by the way, the fuel storage for Hamas, a massive part of it is under the Shifra hospital. Under the hospital is the fuel where they say they don't have enough for the hospital and the command center, war crime upon war crime upon war crime. And people are going out and protesting, saying it's all about the Jews.
Right. I know that our time is short, Eric, and so I really want to touch upon one last point with you on this conversation. And to our viewers, I want to reassure you, we hope to have many more of these conversations with Dr. Mandel. American national security. What are America's options, and how important is what's happening now to the United States of America and to Americans?
So this is not just an inflection point for Israel, a major one. This is for the United States and how it's viewed in the world. Can America first support Israel. At the same time, it's supporting Ukraine, that it's also supporting Taiwan and there. Can we be a multi-front place that we have credible military threats? We have underinvested in our military. Getting back specific to Israel, because it is the most important part of what's going here.
Right. Why is that so important to the United States? Why should it matter to people here?
Because if there was not in Israel, American security interest would be so undermined. We have no other ally we can trust in the region. It's not Turkey, the second largest of military in NATO, certainly not Egypt, or not Jordan. None of those countries share the values and have the military and share a commitment to democracy that Israel has with the United States. It is a security thing. Our Sixth Fleet goes to Haifa ports. The research and development that we get from Israel for our troops. There is so much going on. We've stored munitions. A lot of the munitions that we stored in Israel went to Ukraine, so it was easy. There is so much that goes on that we need Israel as Americans, not only for security, we need it for advanced research and development, for science, medicine. Israel is a diamond sitting in a very, very bad neighborhood that is incredibly important for Americans.
But there are those who claim, Eric, that it's because of Israel that the U.S. has such dire relations with parts of the Arab and Islamic world. Is that correct?
No, it's not correct. First of all, what we're dealing with is you cannot appease radical Islamists, whether they're Shiites in Iran, which multiple administrations have done, or we're talking about Sunni with Muslim Brotherhood ideology, which comes out as ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Hamas. They're all one and the same, different sides of the same coin. We cannot destroy their ideology, but we have to suppress them. What we did do that with ISIS, we need to do that with Hamas, and eventually we're going to need to do that with Hezbollah for the greater Middle East. If you want stability, America needs to look like a credible force. When we create vacuums like we left Afghanistan, that created the violence. All these things, you can connect the dots of what's here. So America needs Israel. It's not just Israel needs America, which of course Israel's very grateful for what America does, but it's a two-way street. And most people on both sides of the aisle feel strongly about this. Unfortunately, there's a growing amount that has been hostile to Israel, for one party for a while, and the president is under pressure. And I hope he keeps his resolve. I think he's done a pretty good job to this point of time.
But the truth is, Eric, that the same people would be hostile to America.
Yeah. So anti-Americanism, by the way, most of these people on college campuses, they think that America has done more harm than good in the world.
Right.
They're hostile to America. There's a certain amount of anarchy in what they want. They want to undermine America. We've seen this over protests in the last 5 years.
Right.
America, we're not perfect. Israel's not perfect, but gosh,
right.
Listen.
We're also not the bad guys.
We are not the bad guys.
And I have to ask you, our time is about to run out, but I just want to ask you one personal question. When you hear Antonio Gutierrez talking about that the slaughter didn't happen in a vacuum, and when you hear former President Barack Obama talking about, what happened in Israel was terrible, but the occupation, et cetera, how do you feel about those statements?
Okay. On an objective level, that's moral equivalence. On a personal level, that's obscene. To talk about the gang rapes where women's pelvises were broken, the hostages of children, the books of torture that they had, the maiming, the murder, cutting off of children's arms and watching them slowly bleed, killing parents in front of children. That is what Hamas is. That is what ISIS is. That is what Muslim Brotherhood is. And if you can make a moral equivalence, as Guterres did or the President Obama did, shame on you.
Eric, I can't thank you enough. You've enlightened us, and it felt like the time flew by as if it were mere seconds. I can't tell you how much we appreciate your insights, your understandings of the region, and more than anything, your passion and your big heart to, take that task upon yourself of education, because nothing could be more important these days and in general than education, as we've seen the failure of the American system.
Listen, we need some open ears. And by the way, what I tell, and you viewers should know, you can't convince everybody. Convince your child, convince your parent, convince your sibling, convince your friend of the facts in context, as opposed to just going to echo chambers that are just, when you go on mainstream media, if it bleeds, it leads. That's right. The whole story. It's hard, but that's what they need to do and they're going to need to remain strong for months and months and months, because the defense of Israel, people are going to be coming out very strongly against Israel, and it's already happening.
Anybody who wants to follow your writings, your articles, your wisdom, how could they follow it?
Okay, so first of all, you can go on MEPIN analysis, MEPIN analysis.org. You'll see them there. And I'm going to give you my personal email address because you're my friend, Shahar, and I think your viewers are my friends. It's ermandelmd@gmail, ERMANDELMD@gmail. And if anybody is any other universities or organizations they like to speak to me with, I do lots of Zoom talks also. Please reach out to me. Again, ermandelmd@gmail. And I thank you, Shahar, for giving me this opportunity to share what I know.
And thank you. And I urge our viewers, reach out. There is immense amount of wisdom here and knowledge that I think is direly needed these days, not just for Israel, but for the United States. So thank you very much. And to all of you, our viewers, we assure you that here at JBS will continue to keep you updated as things move forward in Israel and the Middle East. It's always important to remember and remind, just like Dr. Mandel said, it's not just about Israel and Hamas, but there is a great moral, strategic meaning in what's happening now to Israel, to the United States, and for the entire world. As we say, may we see better days, and may they come soon. I'm Shahar Azani, and thank you all for watching. And as we tend to say these days, Am Yisrael Chai.